Welcome, everyone, to the Intercoin Show. I always love it when our guest has their own Wikipedia page. Today, we've got Patri Friedman on the show. Patri is the grandson of Milton Friedman. He's the son of David Friedman. We're going to talk about, honestly, I love consequentialist libertarianism, people who make arguments for libertarianism on the basis of outcomes. And I think Patri definitely carries on the tradition. So I would say I am very, very impressed by what he has done in just the last, 15 years. We're going to talk about the Seasteading Institute. We're going to talk about polycentric law. We're going to talk about how you can create your own city in the Honduras. So welcome, everyone, to the Intercoin Show. Welcome, Patri. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So yeah, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? How did you, growing up, how did you get interested in these things? I imagine having a family where your dad and your grandfather are, promoting free market principles, especially, the Chicago school and especially like anarcho-capitalism with your dad. What was it like growing up, and how did you get interested in all this?
Well, let's see. I think I got interested in this stuff because I had the intuitive libertarian morals, right? And just kind of that's seemed like obvious to me that was what was right and good. And in high school, I would just argue with people, and that was fine. But after I graduated college and I was kind of free to go live somewhere, I got really frustrated that that this country didn't fit my values, really no country fit my values. And, there's the research coming out from Jonathan Haidt on libertarian personality types and how, it looks like it's not, there's this intuitive idea that our ideas are right and good. And so if we just argue with enough people, we can convince the masses. And it just there's evidence coming in that this is actually probably not true, right? It maybe it's 10% of the population that is libertarians. And so in a democracy, that's never going to work. And so I found myself just frustrated that I couldn't live in a society that fit my values, right? I don't want my tax money used to go make wars. And I don't want my tax money used to lock people up for what plants they put in their mouth. And there was no option for a society that, that fit those values. And so I was well, all right. I love these ideas of freedom from my grandfather. I'm really interested in polycentric law, market anarchism, whatever you want to call it, from my dad. And I want to live in a society that fits my values. So what's going on here? Why can't I? And I got into public choice economics and these mailing lists on Yahoo groups. There was one called Nation Builders that was about micronations. Wow. And could you start your own country? And there was one called Floating Cities that was about whether you could build on the ocean. And I don't know, I just got into what is going on? Why do countries suck? Why are they not libertarian? Maybe we need to be able to start our own. So it just came out. It's the standard entrepreneur story, honestly, of I wanted to make the thing I wanted to have. And the thing I wanted to have was a well-run country oriented around freedom. And it didn't exist. And so I've been working for 20 years to try to make it. And we're kind of getting there.
Wow. So that's big, right? I mean, I know entrepreneurs, they want to build a two-sided marketplace, for crafts, right? And that became Etsy. Or they want to build a platform that, has freedom of speech or whatever. And that's maybe Twitter, right? At least in the beginning. But you want to build a whole country. I mean,
a bunch of countries, not just one. It morphed even from I want that country to myself to I want to change the world so that a bunch of different groups of people can start their own sovereign countries.
And I've always been saying that libertarians have to put their money where their mouth is, right? So people talk and talk for decades, right? And not just libertarians, there's lots of movements that talk, but it's when they actually put it into practice, when they start to show maybe on a small scale of what it could look like, right? I've interviewed people on the show about basic income, right? If you watched the show, you've seen me interview, people like, for example, the basic income movement, Scott Santens. And I've said the same thing, like, there's been experiments on small scale, and that already shows things, but we need to implement, things on a larger scale. So what would you say is like the largest scale that we have so far, like after all this, right? Talk a little bit about the history, first of all, the Seasteading Institute, and, how far did that get, and how big are these things today? Like, what's the largest libertarian micronation, if you will, today?
That's easy because there's one of them. The history with seasteading. Basically, like at the beginning when I started working on this stuff, countries were not at all willing to work with us. So there was this group. Actually, one of my friends from it is here today, Adam Saline. But there's this group that they put a full page ad in The Economist in 1999. They got $1 million in trust, and they said, we want to build a city based on objectivism. Will any country let us? And they got nothing, no answer. Now, part of the reason is that the way that you develop business government clients is not by just posting an ad in The Economist. It's by networking and getting to know them, having meetings or whatever. But also countries were just not open to that at that time. And so that group actually pivoted to try to build a really early digital currency and stock market and digital incorporation, which did not work out. But it was just not possible. Governments were not willing to fragment their sovereignty or delegate it to cities the way they are now. And so I said, well, if the goal is to enable startup countries, then this is often done on the new frontier, right? And if we can open up a new frontier, then we can build new societies with new rules. And so I looked at seasteading, and it just came partly from that Yahoo group of the ocean cities. And so I spent years and years working on, kind of the engineering practicality and the law. So the law of the sea is really interesting from a polycentric law standpoint. So the way it works is that if you're on a ship, now not like a fixed platform, it has to be movable. If you're on a ship and you're out past 12 nautical miles, you're under the law of the country whose flag you fly, which is the country that you've registered with to franchise their sovereignty. Now, you're not allowed to exploit resources. That's owned by the coastal state, any kind of fish, oil and gas, any of that. But what's happening on the ship is regulated by this country that you're franchising sovereignty from. This is the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, Admiralty Law. So it's actually this competitive virtual association. It's still one legal system on the entire vessel, but it is competitive governance, which is amazing. And the downside is that.
Sorry, I just want to ask the one question. So if there's a murder that occurs on one of these ships on the high seas, right? And people say, right, oh, well, it's the international waters, so it goes unpunished. No one's going to.
No, that is not in the slightest true. Yeah, people have a lot of very false ideas about international waters. No, if there's a murder, for the person who was murdered, that country is going to get involved because it's their citizen. And then it's under if you're out past 12 miles, it's under the jurisdiction of the country that flagged that ship. And if you don't fly a flag, you're basically you're a renegade. You're like a pirate. Any warship of any country can stop you for any reason and just take you in for being flagless. You have no status because in international law, only sovereigns have rights. People have no rights. And so if you're not associated with a sovereign, then you're nothing. But it's this competitive virtual system, which is super, super cool. It's just that it's also the ocean is really, really expensive. So there's one condo cruise ship. It's called the World of Residency, the world, and it goes all around the country all of the time. All around the world all of the time. And it lost a ton of money for the banks. They weren't able to sell out, the several hundred berths on board. And the residents actually the bank started trying to like rent them out, like Airbnb it, and the residents who'd like paid a ton of money to like be on this like ship, they didn't like it, so they bought it back from the bank. But like the cheapest unit on this, a condo, was like 1.5 million and 250,000 a year. So that's like how much OPEX to CAPEX, like 1/6. Versus your house, you might be paying like a few percent a year in like maintenance and insurance and stuff. So like the ocean is just, it's expensive. And I think that there's things that you could do with like used cruise ships. I think that like medical tourism on a cruise ship would really work. I think you could probably do like a retirement home, something that really depended on like low cost labor. But it's just expensive and difficult. And so there's like some versions of seasteading that I think are worth doing. And there's like really exciting stuff happening right now in Panama with this company Ocean Builders that's building sea pods. So it's like the first production seastead. And these are the guys who they did their prototype in Thailand in 2019. And the Thai government found out that like these seasteaders who were talking about like having sovereignty on the ocean were like living on this platform. And they freaked out and accused them of like treason as like a threat to Thai sovereignty. Because remember, Thailand is on the South China Sea, which is like the most contested like water region in the world because it has a bunch of countries and it has oil and gas. And China does stuff like turning rocks into like platforms and stationing people there to like claim more oil and gas. So these guys were like being hunted for a capital crime by this like, you know, like military dictatorship. They had to go into hiding. And it was this, you know, it was this whole thing. Luckily they hid successfully. They escaped successfully. They got to Panama and they have this wonderful community there in Linton Bay that's working on a bunch of different like blue ocean tech and is manufacturing these like sea pods, which is kind of like a single family house that it's like on a spar and it moves more slowly than a ship does, but it's way more stable in the waves. So you could take it out and anchor it, and you basically won't notice the waves because it just has this thin spar. So that's what's happening in seasteading. But starting in 2011, Honduras created the first program for what we now call charter cities, which are it's sort of like the next evolution of the special economic zone, where SEZs generally just have like some tax breaks, like some different labor laws. But in a charter city, you actually have like a significantly different legal system within the area. So the way the Honduran program worked is you have to follow the Honduran constitution, all of its treaties, and its criminal law. But the zone gets to apply to the government with its own body of commercial law. And commercial law is like a big deal. That's like medical regulations. That's regulating your stock market, regulating your currencies, corporate law, zoning, and building codes. It's a lot. And so that was really exciting. And so I started working with Honduras in 2011. And my focus since then is mainly creating these special jurisdictions on land. Sorry for the long answer, but like the history of this whole movement is a little bit long. That was kind of brief. And on the question of like, what's the biggest? There's only one. It's Honduras Prospera, which is mainly located on the Caribbean island of Roatan. And there's about 100 people living in the zone right now. And they're building the first multifamily. They're building like crazy. They now have the tallest buildings on the island. If you go to prospera.hn/ I think it's like developments. Do development here. I'll progress.
Development.
Yeah.
No, it's something.
Yeah, it's like / development - progress. So the tallest, I think the tallest building on the island was like 8 stories or less.
They're building that
info.prospera.hn / development progress. And they're building 4 towers. Yeah, so we can just go through. So this beta building can hold like 75 employees. So it was like non-residential. Mm-hmm. There's 2 resorts that are part of it. This pristine bay is one of them. It's got like the only 18-hole golf course on the island and lots of verandas. So they have these 2 resorts. They're building these Duna residences. It's going to be 4 towers that are like 14 to 18 stories, and they've already gotten high enough that they're the tallest on the island. Every one of these 4 towers is going to be taller than everything else on the island. And then if you scroll down, they're building, they've prototyped some tiny homes. The circular factory is super cool. So they worked with Zaha Hadid to make it so that you can order these condos where you use an online program to configure and design and customize your condo. And then the design goes to this factory, and you can think about it a little bit like 3D printing, except rather than 3D printing in place, you have a robotic factory that builds the elements for your custom condo and then ships them to the site, and then they get assembled there, because that's just easier to have like the factory in one place. Then with 3D printing, you have to like move the whole thing. So tons of exciting stuff happening there. No, it's not prefab. Well, it's customized prefab, right? So it's not like assembly line prefab, which would be, is like cheaper and more efficient. It's like custom prefabbed at the factory.
Well, what I love about this is you could use technology, right? You could use robots, you could experiment. Of course, you could use this inside countries. Look, before I go into like all this, because we're going to talk about Prospera and we're going to talk about Honduras, I want to talk about sort of the larger picture. What you just, there was so much you covered in your answer. And I kind of wanted to just dive into sort of the legitimacy. It was very interesting that you said each ship needs to have a flag, otherwise you're sort of like a pirate. I imagine in space maybe that will start being a thing, but for now, you could launch your whatever. And then you said that if you wanted to build these pods and these people wanted to build these things, they were attacked. Meanwhile, like China's building all these things in the South China Sea, artificial islands. We see, Dubai building the Palm Island, all this kind of stuff. To me, I want to talk about the larger picture. Sometimes on the show, I get into these large, topics. For me, I'm a sort of interesting brand of libertarian. I'm not as motivated by the taxation stuff. I'm motivated by like war, like violence, right? Meaning, right? I'm motivated to mitigate that. And what's interesting is that a lot of wars start because of sort of these ideas about nationalism or flags. And so just to speak about the people that we have spoken to, right? So the Rohingya people from Burma or Myanmar, very interesting. Interesting. What happened was there's a lot of violence there. Some people say there was organized rape campaigns and so on. Again, this often is because a country is organized with multiple groups in it. And so in this case, for example, it would be Buddhists and Muslims. But in other cases, like Tamil, it's crazy. Like you look at that part of the world, you look at Sri Lanka, for example, and there's a Tamil groups, and one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, as they say. So the Tamil group, Tamil Tigers, what's interesting is they did Tamil Tigers. Is the group that did the most terror acts in ever. I don't know exactly what, but and of course you've got the Kurds with their PKK. You've got the Basque people in France. You've got Catalonia in Spain, and now of course we have situations. You have Houthi rebels in Yemen. All these things are happening. If you look at every one of these things, like let's say you look at Catalonia, just to give you some more tame examples, you have Catalonia had a referendum. Catalonia has been trying to secede from Spain for a very long time. They've got Barcelona, they've got Ibiza, I think, and so they think, okay, we're different. We want to have our own country. And so if you look at, they had a referendum back in 2017, Catalan independence referendum. And so what happened was, the authorities didn't like this very much. Obviously, they try to prevent people from voting, but at least we heard what the people had to say. And the result is Spain simply arrested all the leaders of the movement. Now, I just want to say, a lot of times that is better than a years-long sectarian war or some sort of weird thing, a very destructive thing. Here's another example: Kurdistan, Kurdish Iraq referendum. So the Kurds in Iraq, same year, had an independence referendum, and Turkey didn't like that. Neighboring states didn't like that. So what I find is very interesting is that the international community, right, it's the United Nations, right, for example, representing the international community, is made up of existing nations, right? They're made up of countries. And so these countries have a vested interest to never allow secession and never allow these things. And so,
never is too strong, right? If you look at the graph of the number of countries, it is like steadily increasing. So they are the gatekeepers for sure. And they put up like high standards. And I, personally would want to see like a lot more secession and a lot more nations. But like the number of countries is increasing steadily. It's like a really significant trend, like since World War II. So, they are gatekeepers, but we're still getting like steady kind of like secession.
But every one of these things that I've seen, except maybe Montenegro here, although I don't know about Palau, a lot of these are associated with violence, like South Sudan. You got Kosovo, you got, NATO bombing campaign preceding that. And then you've got East Timor, right? And then, for example, take Bangladesh, right? Bangladesh was a country that seceded from essentially Pakistan, but in their independence war, right? You would think there's genocidal rape campaigns, like literally a lot of grief.
I mean, I agree. I think that people should be able to secede peacefully, and that's great. All I'm saying is that there is like a steady trickle of new countries. Yeah, Palau. So I work with Palau. It's really interesting. So there's a Palau digital residency. I have my application in there, but we're doing this cool thing there where we're making a corporate registry in Palau, like for offshore incorporation, where instead of having its own body of corporate law, like the way it works today, if you want to have like an offshore corporation in the Caymans, you have to like learn the Caymans corporate law or get a lawyer who knows it, and you're like under that body of law. But the X corporations that we're creating in Palau, they actually just make use of other countries' bodies of corporate law. So starting with Delaware, because Delaware is like the top incorporation jurisdiction in the world. It's a standard for the US, and the US is the leader of the world. And so it's like, and it's not copying. It's not like making a copy of Delaware corporate law. It's like, if you think as a software programmer, it's like importing it like a library by reference. The way it works is it just says whatever current Delaware corporate law is, whatever the precedents are, if we have to have a dispute, then that's what we're going to use. And I love it because it's kind of like viewing law like source code, which is like one of my, kind of like main insights over the years that I use it again and again. And then Delaware is just the beginning. So, we're going to add Singapore law. We're going to add Taiwan law. So imagine that you have a corporation in Taiwan and you're worried about the future security of Taiwan. You could open a Palau X Corp and choose Taiwan law, and then move all your corporate documents over, all your resolutions, all your articles of incorporation without having to change or edit them at all. Because you're just in exactly the same body of law, but now you're in this like U.S. protected jurisdiction. So Palau is, the way I think of it is like one step down from being an overseas territory. It's an independent sovereign nation, but with a very close relationship with the U.S. And so this idea that you could like move your corporation between jurisdictions, like as easily as like moving a program on the web to a different server that just like has the same tech stack implemented, is super exciting. So just since you mentioned Palau, that's one of the projects I'm really excited about.
That's fantastic. I throughout this thing, like, feel free to, give us more examples of these things, because I love
I think I want people to get that, like making the world more polycentric, right? Having more private competitive law. Like, it's obviously, like, what I would love to do would be to like have a sovereign anarcho-capitalist city-state. That would be super cool. I would love to see that. I would love to be involved in making that and to live there. But there's a, you know, the general idea of like getting law that serves people by having it privately generated and having there be competition to give us the best law. Like, that's the big idea. And there are other ways of getting that. And like, the more ways we have of making the world, you know, more like competitive governance, the better for us. And so this like Palau Corporation that's, you know, making it so that there's kind of like more competition for offshore jurisdictions. And, you know, one of the cool things about like law is automatically open source, right? Because unless the laws are secret, which, you know, obviously people hate for really good reasons, then they're public. And that means you can just copy and remix any laws anywhere in the world. They're like all automatically open source. So, you know, I love that we're starting to do that, to import them like a library in Palau.
So I want to get into that. I want to talk about the bottom-up approach of, you know, polycentric law, anarcho-capitalism. You said an anarcho-capitalist state. I definitely want to ask about, you know, your dad's ideas about how to build it, or Murray Rothbard, the ideas of, you know, the free market for law. But before we get into that, I just want to finish out the topic of the top-down. The world, in my opinion, has these at the top, there's like these federations, right? In EU, the United States, and they may even have broader blocks, right? Like the Trans-Pacific Treaty, or, you know, the one with Mexico and Canada. What is that? The free trade
NAFTA.
agreements.
NAFTA and
exactly.
CAFTA, yeah.
Yeah. So like they have these blocks and they have these economic rivalries, and we understand that, you know, there's obviously people need fuel, people need energy, people need workers and so on. So they compete for all kinds of things. But that's the nice part, right? The less nice part is when you try to challenge that system and try to secede from, you know, one of these things. Brexit was kind of like the nicest one, right? They're kind of like, okay, you were able by your constitution to secede. And like a much less nice one was like the American Civil War, right? They were like, no, you're not seceding, right? so like, for me, the question is, if Hong Kong came out, right, the entire island, right, came out and said, China, we don't want you to appoint our governors, we want to appoint our own governors, just that one thing, right? And China said no. What would the United Nations do, right? They would probably just be like, well, it's an internal matter, because one empire, the British Empire, had a deal with another empire, and they would just gave Hong Kong like a football. Like they said, okay, well, a deal's a deal, here you go, and that's it, right? So basically, it seems that top down, so my question is, what is really the precariousness or the security of these laws or these enforcements, given that there's countries with large armies, nuclear weapons? I mean, here's Sealand, right? You probably know about Sealand, off the coast of, where is it? Like, they were invaded, right?
Guys.
What happened?
Well, they're not a sovereign country, right? I mean, like, people have this idea, you know, and this is a little bit of the pirate radio stuff worked with Sealand, just because of what maritime law looked like back then. But, you know, it's just a tiny number of people. Like, I think, like, to be a country, it used to be that the mentality, you know, when I got into this stuff in like 2000, 2001, it was like, find some way to like hack sovereignty, to get like an act of recognition like Sealand did. And then you're sovereign, and then you can build up. And I completely disagree. Like, getting other countries to recognize a new jurisdiction, you have to actually be as powerful as a country. So like, my idea is you get to like the 20th percentile of population size, of economic power, of military power, right? And now you say, hey, I'm bigger than 1 in 5 countries, recognize me. It's something that comes after the fact. Like you said, like these big top-down organizations, they have a bias against recognizing countries. And they're going to be even more biased if it's a country based on shared values, right? And a desire to live under a certain type of political system. Because traditionally, nation states, like the word nation as Balaji says, like nation, like natal, like nation means a group of people who are born together. The very word refers to like an ethnic grouping, as opposed to a network state, a group of people who come together around shared values. So they're not going to want to recognize you. And what that means is you have to so clearly be a nation on the scale of nations in order to get recognized. It's not something that you like hack ahead of time.
So I want to play something. This is, Elena, you shared this with me. This guy, 𝐓𝐨𝐩𝐢𝐜𝐬, he basically has this company called NAS Daily, and he produces amazing videos from around the world, different countries, and he travels. So one of the videos that really struck me, and this was a week ago, he produced this. I'm going to play it. I think, there's no copyright on, it's for commentary, but also there's no, I'm not going to like be demonetized because this is produced by this independent channel. Hey, take a look at what he says, because I think an interesting space is the internet, right? The internet.
Absolutely. And so Balaji, who he's talking about here, was my first check into my venture fund Pronomos. We just had the first network state conference in Miami a couple of weeks ago, so I work with him closely, and he's awesome.
Wow, this is what I'm talking about. I love to meet the people who are actually doing these things. All right, so I'm going to play this for the audience. Take a look. I'm going to skip around, but I'm going to play a few, like 2 minutes of it. So here we go.
Right now, there are 195 official countries in the world. But did you know that soon we're going to have thousands of new countries with their own flag, passport, and even land? Why and how can you and I start a country? This crazy idea I read about in a book called The Network State by this guy, Balaji.
That's what you were just talking about, right?
Hi.
Oh, by the way, can everyone hear? Can everyone hear the video as I'm playing it?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, perfect. So this is
Balaji, and I think it's now possible to start new countries.
First of all, why do we need new countries? Well, because old countries are too slow. It takes years and decades to get anything done. Just to get a court decision, you need to wait a decade in some cases. It's the same reason why we build startups, because big companies are too bureaucratic. And some countries don't make sense. Someone created their borders using pen and paper years ago, and the people are stuck inside.
You can go watch this video. It's incredible. A lot of the stuff, the ideas, it's like a free market innovation for creating countries. But how do you get from here to there? We skip to the end, or is sort of Balaji explains here. 1 second. Here we go.
Better laws, better everything.
So you can have technological innovation, cultural innovation, moral innovation, change you want to see, you can now execute if you can get enough people online to agree with you and crowdfund the territorial.
This idea sounds stupid and crazy, but theoretically, it's not impossible. Only 13 years ago, someone started a whole new currency without a government. It started as a joke. Now it's not.
He's wrong. I mean, Bitcoin didn't start as a joke, but Dogecoin did. And hey, maybe it will be the new Bitcoin.
It's Bitcoin, and countries like El Salvador have started to recognize it as a real national currency.
We've started billion-dollar companies. We've started trillion-dollar currencies. Could we start million-person countries?
The countries we live in today are just ideas, but these ideas can be so much better, faster, and smarter. Sometimes.
Okay, so I didn't get to the point. Oh, here we go. Gain diplomatic recognition. This is what I wanted to play for 20 seconds. Here we go.
Go to one of the existing 195 countries and convince them to recognize your people, your passport, your flag as a real country. The big countries will not recognize you, but the small countries will, because they can trade with you and learn from your people. countries copy each other, and more will recognize you.
So this is a continuous process. Once you realize it's not going to happen overnight, that's fine. You get the first, and then you work on it more, and you get 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's a cascading process where the more countries that recognize you, the more countries that will recognize you, the more you can grow.
This new...
Anyway, Patri, so that was, so I just wanted to play that for everybody. But is that the roadmap for you guys as well with Prospera? Or what would you say?
Well, no, the thing about Prospera, or any, like, charter cities are plugging into the existing nation state system, and they're making use of the fact that a sovereign country is allowed to delegate its sovereignty. And so creating a jurisdiction that has different laws than the rest of the country, which I think was really pioneered by the Dubai Financial Center, is something that countries can do. But, you're kind of like their guest. Right. Like, I think, like, if a charter city tried to secede, I think that would be terrible for the entire charter cities movement, because now the countries, kind of like can't trust the city to stick to their side of the deal, to work within their system and respect their sovereignty. And so charter cities are a way that we can show, hey, if we're allowed to write our own laws, we can create thriving economies, have lots of people living in freedom, creating benefits for the, sharing revenue with the host country and just making a better society. But then what we need to do with that is, like, later, this is 5-10 years down the road, is to start a project that is intending to be sovereign from the beginning, and that works with a country, like, with that expectation. One interesting thing that I've been exploring lately, since there are new countries forming constantly, is starting to get to know some of the groups around the world that are seeking sovereignty this decade, and potentially partner with one or more of them, that as they get their sovereignty, to do a project where, part of the country is then, rather than being like a charter city, is something more like an almost fully sovereign, like, kind of like joint project. So whereas like a network state, it's starting out not part of the system of nation states at all, right? And so it can kind of like grow and grow. Like I said, you get to the 20th percentile of people and economy, then you can say, like, hey, like, we're basically a country, and you're playing diplomacy along the way too, right? It's not something that just happens, right? The network state needs to be, like, explicitly working to get diplomatic recognition, to partner with countries, and to kind of like fractionally, like, bit by bit, like, there's no reason that a country couldn't recognize passports from a network state. Like, they're allowed to choose what identification documents to require to come into their country. And so I think there's ways that the network state can kind of like show itself to be like a country bit by bit.
I think that is exactly what things are going to go to. And then I want to talk about, this is what I want to talk about next. So we talk about the top down, how do you break away? Let's talk about the bottom up, right? Let's talk about the actual mechanics of it. First, I want to talk about, what is the law exactly? So let's say you've got a legal framework. Honduras has, the top down, they created a zone called 𝐓𝐨𝐯 law, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk about 𝐓𝐨𝐯 law and what is the status?
That's what I mentioned earlier. So the 𝐓𝐨𝐯 law, it's that, the projects apply to a government regulator to administer a zone that follows the Honduran constitution and criminal law, but has its own commercial law, its own courts, its own police. And, it specifies all the details about what the oversight of that is. And, that, like, your businesses need to employ Hondurans, a whole bunch of things. And the law has been through a few versions, but about a year ago, a new government came into power, and this government, that basically the group, the Conservative Party that had won elections and been running the country since 2009, lost power to a far left party while I love the Zeta program, the conservatives were clearly corrupt with drug traffickers. The president of Honduras, as soon as he lost the election and stepped down, was on a plane to the U.S. To face the U.S. had enough evidence against him for a year. It's just they have a policy against arresting a sitting head of state. They don't do it. So corrupt government, but there were good people in it. People who'd been to Western universities, had economic degrees, who created the program. It's just unfortunate that there was that kind of significant corruption. And then the new government, has kind of made it part of their campaign to reform or even eliminate the program. And they've eliminated it in the law. And the 3 Zetas that are already approved are still operating. The terms of, as I understand it, the terms of the program are that any of the zones that are approved and operating are grandfathered in. In the case of Prospera, they're grandfathered in for 50 years. And, there's just an open question about whether the Honduran government is going to stick to that. And, and so Prospera has initiated action under some of the free trade agreements you mentioned that bind Honduras. And actually, the U.S. State Department just this week issued its annual statement on Honduras and the economic climate there. And, the State Department explicitly said, there's people in Honduras who oppose this program, but the way they've just shut it down and the government won't answer letters from the zone saying, hey, can you confirm that we're grandfathered in? What are your plans? We've got tens of millions of dollars invested here. And so the U.S. State Department is hey, that's not okay. You're facing Honduras, you're exposing yourself to really, really significant liability. Because the way that there are these programs in international law, there's a system where you can, if a country, this was developed because, of course, governments, sometimes governments just try to seize things. And so there's something called the New York Convention, which says that if a government is the New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitration, that 120 countries have that a lot of countries have signed. And what it says is that if a country breaks their deal with you or takes your stuff in a way that's illegal, you can go to international arbitration. And if you win your case against them, you can take this case to any country that signed the New York Convention, and they will seize, suppose it's Honduras, you could just go to any country that signed the convention where Honduras has assets, meaning bank accounts, property, anything, and the country will seize those assets and pay you any damages that Honduras did. Now, a country like Cuba or Venezuela, they just don't keep any assets in any other jurisdictions, and that's why they're able to act as they do. But countries that are kind of part of the international economic order, that have trading partners, they're subject to this. So we don't know what's going to happen. It's still playing out, but it's really clear that the law is on the side of these zones. And there's really significant repercussions for Honduras if they don't follow their own laws. So, I'm hopeful that it can be kind of settled soon and peacefully.
Well, I do want to get into the nitty gritty of how you build one up from the bottom up, because there's so much to talk about. But we keep getting to this, intervening of large countries, which of course they're omnipresent. They're always a giant presence on the thing. So, you talk about how countries can sort of have these long arm of the law, right? Reach out. And the two things that came to mind, more from a criminal point of view, almost, for perhaps a a nonviolent offense, right? One is Julian Assange. He's an Australian civilian. He has an Australian passport. He's an Australian citizen, but Australia is not doing anything in terms of extradition of Julian Assange. And the other one I was thinking was 𝐿𝐸𝐬𝐚. This guy 𝐿𝐸𝐬𝐚, he used to run. He was extradited, and also with the cooperation of Australian, or I think New Zealand authorities. So what is that like? How come these countries are just like rolling over for their and giving up their citizens to the United States or whatever? You don't have to answer that.
Yeah, the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world, and also countries countries don't generally have the policy that like we want to protect our citizens, even if they do things that, like if you do something that's like illegal in your country and illegal in another country, like obviously they're not going to like back you up. That's not their job, right? It's mainly situations like, say, in Singapore and North Korea, where the crime and the penalties are seen as just being like totally nuts from the point of view of a legal system that countries try to intervene. When people get like kidnapped and are going to be murdered. But stuff like Julian Assange, I mean, look, what did Julian Assange do? He like made it easy to like leak government secrets. Like, why would you think that governments would support like a guy who's like making it easier to leak government secrets? Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. The whole establishment is run by the countries, right? So of course they're not I mean, some people might say that we need more transparency in government, and then we wouldn't have all these wars because we would know what people said behind closed doors. Just as one example, we would know what happened between NATO and Gorbachev, or NATO and Putin, or whatever. We would know what was said. As it is, we read tea leaves, and the governments can spy on everyone, but we can't know what they said. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and sometimes I get into these other discussions, not for this, more like Noam Chomsky, but the 5 I's. This is essentially 5, including Australia and the United States and New Zealand, the English-speaking countries. They share their intelligence. And the intelligence community, one of their restrictions is they can't spy on their own citizens. So, Snowden was talking about that and exposing that. But the thing is that they can spy on other people's citizens, and the other country can spy on your citizens. And then if they share the information, right, then by that way they can spy on their own citizens. So I'm just saying, I don't think these countries have an interest in becoming more. They certainly want to know what their citizens are doing, but I don't think they would like to reveal what their black ops and the Pentagon budget is going to, or anything like that. What is it, $35 trillion that the Pentagon has never been able to account for? It's like,
and look, what I'm suggesting, my viewpoint and my framework is that part of what's going on is that you can view government as an industry, and that I think it's like, I don't know, it's easy to get mad about this stuff, but I don't think that that's mentally healthy, right? Like the circle of control, like focus on the things that you can control and don't worry about the things that you can't control. And I'm saying that instead of like thinking of this as like, I don't know, like how dare they do this? Just be like, hey, I'm a customer of government. Right now I'm choosing the United States as my government provider. And there's some things that are amazing about the United States as a provider of government. There's some things that are terrible about the United States as a provider of government, like this, like all the money they spend on the military, like the lack of transparency, like tons and tons of things that we don't like. Well, rather than being like, hey, that's morally wrong, right? Or like, how dare they? What I'm saying is like, look, in the real world, here's what you can do. You can look at other countries, decide if that's a better bundle, if you like their transparency, if you like their military spending better. And then if they'll let you in, which for most of us in the US, we could get into, almost any country we wanted. We have that privilege. Then you should move there. And if you don't move there, like you're saying that this is the best bundle of government services in the world. Now, what most of your audience will probably say, like me, is like, okay, but the choices are shitty. And I totally agree. And that's why I've dedicated my career and worked for the last 20 years on this one thing. How can we make more choices for the jurisdictions to live under? And, and it's possible now, right? So you could go move to Honduras Prospera, and or what you could do is get if you're a founder type, you can create your own jurisdiction. I'm working with a bunch of countries around the world, And our shortage is founders and communities that are ready to move. It's not countries that are interested anymore. Like, this is something brand new in the last couple of years. Like, countries get that they're in the 21st century. They get that if you're a small country, like, innovation, like creating special jurisdictions, is how you're gonna like grow your economy. It's how you're gonna compete. And so there's this brand new option that didn't exist before. You can create a network state and work with governments to materialize that network state into a city where you have the power to write some of the laws. Or even if you're not directly creating the city, my work is going to create these jurisdictions around the world that are privately run by companies who want to serve you, the citizen, as their customer, and can customize their laws for you. So if you form a community of people that wants to like move together to a free city and live together, you can, even without negotiating with governments, take advantage of these containers that we're creating. And there's one online now, and there's going to be, there will be like, I think we might be able to get one a year now. There will be at least one more in the next couple of years. And so it's this different world, right? And it's this different mentality. And I think it's really important for our mental health to just be like, I'm shopping. I'm going to shop for where to live. If I don't like the deal, I should have picked somewhere else. If I don't like any of them, then either build something better or, sorry, dude, stop complaining. There's no rule that says that the universe has to cater to you. Like, make the choice, do the work to create an alternative, or live under the existing alternatives. But like being mad about it, there's just no point. Life's too short.
I love your approach to this. And as an entrepreneur, I mean, I've spent like 10 years building online, kind of like what you're doing, but in cyberspace. And I got to tell you, like every day it could be positive. You could be building stuff. I call it bottom up, right? You're putting one foot in front of the other. And I'm going to close these tabs and, where people get mad. But before I do want to say one other thing, just so that people are going to say, look, the choices can exist, right? But the fact is your family lives in these countries and your friends are there. So for you to leave Facebook, or for you to leave New York City, or for you to leave, China is tough. And then when you leave it, also China has the long arm. Look at this, 230,000. I think this was a study. They exposed that China is approaching people in these countries, telling them to return. Otherwise their families will experience, bad things or whatever. I mean, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah. So you can't opt out of the system even in some of these countries.
Absolutely. That's terrible. I mean, it's against this basic principle of competitive governance, which is like, no jurisdiction should be required to let any particular person in, but you should let people out, right? And if you're not, that's like it's a form of like slavery. Like a soft slavery, right? There's much worse forms of slavery than like having to live in China, but it is like fundamentally at its root, like a form of slavery, denying people the right to exit.
Well, these countries, they feel like, they own a lot of their population. They've educated them in their schools, and then they go and they help, a B1 visa to the United States. And they're like, oh, no, you should return and like use all your skills in our country. But that's, they're using force. They're literally intimidating these people into doing that. So hopefully that won't happen. I'll close the chapter on this. It's just something that countries seem to be a little desperate in the free market of countries to do, or perhaps they do it for national security. I don't know, but it's not something. You're right. This is very depressing. So let's talk about positive. Okay, so here are some examples which have taken place in the past. I love to give these two examples. One is Walt Disney World. Okay, Walt Disney bought up a bunch of land. He did it secretly for a while. Then he decided that he's going to make his own privately owned city. Now, when I say private, I don't mean that it's owned by one person. I want to make that clear. People often say capitalism, free market capitalism is private ownership. The fact is that it could be owned by a corporation, which is itself in turn owned by shareholders, which is publicly traded. So when I say privately owned, Disney Corp is publicly traded. And now we have DAOs online, decentralized autonomous organizations popping up, which is something related to what I do. And so imagine people collectively coming together and owning something voluntarily, right? It's sort of the free market version of like Karl Marx's idea of like the workers owning the factory, right? Except they can own any factory in a market that has some rules. And so they have shareholders. Anyway, the point being that Walt Disney had investors, and then eventually the company went public. But this town is owned top down by a corporation. All the workers, essentially all the permits are given out by the corporation, and all of the policies of all the workers and what to pay them, what they're going to represent, the Mickey Mouse, the copyright, the whatever, is being done in this way. Now, here next to it is Boca Raton, like not too far from it. It was started by this dude, Addison Mitzner. He essentially built an unincorporated farming town, and then he wanted to create the foremost resort city on the American North Continent. Basically, exclusive social capital in America. Anyway, he did a bunch of this, ran out of money, and eventually the town was turned over to a democratic group, which essentially it's run democratically by the people who live there. So the difference, right, is that one city has remained privately owned and was given to the control of shareholders who don't live there, and therefore maybe do not get affected by the policies. Like, let's say I say that the workers there, that the water will be, they can't drink the water there. They have to bring their own water or whatever. So as a shareholder, I don't care. I don't live there. I don't care what happens. It doesn't bother. It doesn't touch me. Whereas like a democratically run city, they care about their water supply. They care about, workers' rights because they are the workers. So I guess
I think
like
for me, part of the difference is incentives, right? Like if you do a good job or a bad job in municipal government, there's really not a lot of consequences, right? Maybe you get promoted a little bit faster. If you do like a really bad job, maybe you get fired. But like if you just do your job at a basic level, there's no way that doing a great job translates into great results for you. At a startup, we have this amazing thing called equity, where everybody has a share in what they're building. And if they build something that creates a lot of value, then they get a large financial payoff, right? And we have this like romantic idea that like democracy should work differently, right? And that like, and there is some incentive in the terms of like, if you live in a village small enough where you know everyone, then like you see the impact on them. Like they're your friends, they're your social circle. But like in a town of like a city of like 250,000 people or like 1 million people, there's not much feedback for how you do. And so in a private city where that city's revenue depends on how many people want to live there and how much value do they create, right? It depends on the GDP in the city, affects the value of the private company. If the employees of this private city have equity, they have direct upside where the better a city they make, the more efficiently it's run, the more it competes for the citizens of the world and grows, like the more money they make. And I'm not saying this is the perfect incentive system. And I love how the world of crypto is letting people experiment with like all kinds of other incentive systems. And like, that's amazing. I'm sure there's like ones that work better. But this is like the best system that we have today to create value and make things run well, right? Is that you have a small team that has a vision for doing something new, like you do with Intercoin. They build that, they grow and have more stakeholders over time. And there's like a direct financial incentive to do a good job. And so I think that'll work a lot better for administering a city. And I'm looking forward to finding out, right? We'll see how Prospero grows. We'll see how the next ones grow. And I think they'll outperform democratically elected municipal government, but maybe not, we'll find out.
You'll have a choice. That's what I love. You're going to have a choice. Even the kind of, they call it laboratories of democracy. Well, you could have laboratories of other things, right? So you're absolutely right. Like, I have a question for you. What do you think of like a city? Each city have its own currency, right? So rather than selling shares in the city, or maybe the currency can represent shares, but like then you enter the city and the currency is accepted for all the goods and services within the city, right? So they're now talking about like some countries had to get off the euro or want to get off the euro because of the euro sovereign debt crisis or some other things. We've got cities in the United States that went bankrupt, like Detroit, because they couldn't get enough dollars to sustain like their economy. Like, what do you think of having your own currency in the city as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, you know, and there's the City Coins project that that Balaji is an investor of. I think, I don't know. I think I tend to favor like everyone using like a small number of hard currencies. And I actually want to see us like move even like off hard currencies and onto things like using shares of index funds to pay for things so that you're holding your wealth in actually in like a form that's an investment, right? That's like producing value and growing. That's, you know, me personally, but I do think that like tokenizing cities in the sense of like, I think it's a good thing for the citizens of a city to also, like the employees, have some stake in the city and how it does, right? Maybe you make a requirement that people who live there, like maybe you have to keep 10% of your savings up to some like cap in like equity in the city, right? So that every citizen who's there also benefits. I mean, we've seen this with crypto, right? Where you have the early token holders, the more people they bring in, like the more total amount of value people want to store in that token, the more the token is worth, like as we see with Bitcoin. So the token holders are like incented to like build the value of the token, represent it well, and bring more people in. Like, why can't we have that for cities too?
I think we absolutely can. I think this is right. I think the frontier is digital twins of cities online. A lot of people, like in Roatan, they won't be able to necessarily be there physically, right? I've got commitments in New York. I've got commitments in Puerto Rico or in Europe. I can't always be there. So I think a lot of times people are now looking at, especially for the pandemic, right? They're looking at these sort of online virtual communities. And companies like Meta, you know, they're laying off a lot of people. They took a big gamble. But the idea that you got to start creating robust alternatives, right? Actually, I want to do this. I'm going to go and change my camera into an avatar just to show what's starting to be possible. So again, it's not Facebook. This is Ready Player Me avatars. Intercoin. I know the CEO of Ready Player Me, and we've partnered with them and a bunch of other people to start exploring this. But the idea is that yes, these are virtual worlds, and yes, you probably should get exercise and like get off your butt, and meet people in real life and not just be there, like in that movie Surrogates. But like, I think that ultimately more and more hours are going to be spent on these things, and it does have a certain benefit. You don't have to actually be in the office. You don't have to commute. You don't have to smell smelly armpits of people on the way. And so, do you think that each of these cities would benefit from having an online component, from having an online currency maybe, or an online?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one proposal I've seen that I think is really neat, like, so imagine you're in the network state phase and you don't have your city yet, but maybe you create like a digital twin for the master plan in the metaverse. And
Right.
then people can start like picking their lots, their units, getting to know their neighbors, right?
Right.
And, if there's going to be a store somewhere, right, you could make it so that you could actually like go there and buy things. Just like making the digital twin and then having the network state, like that's the space where like you walk around and meet the people who you're going to be living with, before you actually build. Like, I think that's a really cool idea.
Yes. Like
I know some people working on.
Do you know Slice Up? I'm sure you know they're, one of the startups working with, I spelled them wrong. I was introduced to Kara. They basically work with, want to work with Prospera and that whole, ecosystem to buy fractional shares in buildings. By the way, I thought this was the building you're talking about, the tallest. Is this the tower, or is that something different? Augustin Tower. I don't know.
No, that's something different.
Okay, so
Well,
basically,
that's interesting.
Yeah, look at this.
Yeah, that tower's not, that's beautiful. It's not under construction yet. Wow, I haven't seen that. Cool.
Yeah, I gotta maybe connect you guys, or you already know. Basically, look, they are rendering, right? So you're absolutely right. First, make the 3D rendering, which is cheap, right? 3D models, inhabit them, try it out. And not everyone is ever going to move. So the next thing I want to ask about, right, is e-residency and blended reality, like metaverse, like meetings, right? If I have a meeting and I have a wedding or I have an event and like half the people are here, or maybe 10% of the people are here, but the 90% of the people are not, right? I think there's going to be like this explosion of innovation with Apple's glasses that are coming out and the extended reality that you have on your phone. So you kind of look through your screen. I think people are going to figure out ways to connect the people who aren't physically in the event and the people who are physically in the event.
And this, like the incredible progress that we're like finally seeing in the metaverse. I mean, you know, I was into this stuff in the 90s, right? We had books like Snow Crash, which was the first book in a long time to win the Hugo and the Nebula. And like now it's finally happening. And like this just directly boosts the network state sector, because if you think about it, like what does a network state have jurisdiction over? Right now, like before, like someday in the future, we want network states to get some degree of sovereignty recognition. Great. But like, what do they have today? They have jurisdiction over your digital activities, right? That's what they can do. That's what we can build. And so the more time people spend in the digital world, I mean, like you said, Greg, like, okay, it has downsides. We want to make sure they still get enough exercise and sunlight. But the more time people spend in digital worlds, the more of our lives we live there, the more we start having, you know, our meetings there instead of on Zoom. That's being in the digital territory that network states can own. And so as these products come out, and as, you know, just like more of our time is spent, you know, say like working remotely and like collaborating in a digital space rather than going into an office, that's moving like human activity into the space of the network state. And so it's just going to be like that much easier when when you spend, you know, 25%, 50% of your waking hours in the metaverse or other digital spaces that are governed by a network state. Just makes that much more sense to take it seriously.
I think it would be very serious. I think that, you know, it's like dating sites. It used to be the you know, the fringe people who went on dating sites, I think in the 90s, or not fringe, but like people had suspicion. People had, you know, oh, you didn't meet in real life? Like, what's wrong with you? You know, like whatever. Yeah. And today there are people in Japan, I think like a few million people who just are like shut-ins. They just live, like they never leave their house. Yeah. They're called hikikomori. But I think that's not going to be that way. I think it will become the norm to like spend 4 hours with a VR headset. Like personally, there's two aspects here, right? One is the exercise and the meeting people, and I think that's super important. I will say, you know, there's a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam from 2001, and it speaks about exactly the collapse of sort of the American social community, right? People used to go to church. People used to, you know, know their neighbors. People don't know their neighbors. Like, I live in New York City, right? People do not know their neighbors to any great extent. And that's true all across the board. Whereas like in the past, like you got married, everyone knew you like since you were like 3 years old. So that idea, everything's changing, right? People are living alone in these apartments where, you know, they get married later, they have children later, and so on. A lot of it is good for the environment, I will say, because less fossil fuels are consumed, less garbage is produced, less resources are consumed, obviously, and everyone's richer if there's a smaller population. Elon Musk doesn't agree with that. Other people don't agree. Mm-hmm. It just happens to be, you know, my but the other thing I want to, you know, say is that as these worlds become, as you spend more of your life in it, and as you do something like Neuralink, which is coming up, Elon Musk's initiatives, right? The brain-computer interface, it becomes scary. It becomes a thing where you're living, you know, smelling these things. Now, this is what I want to ask you, and this is kind of in my field, the internet field, right? The big tech, the Facebooks of the world, the Twitters, the big platforms, to me, they are the states in the metaverse, in the internet, right? Meaning, like, it's the same dynamics. For me to opt out of Facebook and create my own thing, I have to convince my friends to leave. I have to, with qbix, I spent 10 years building something that's good enough. People can opt out. But like, it's the same exact dynamic. And my question is, if society is going to spend 4 hours a day or 8 hours a day or whatever, some people hooked up to this thing like the Borg, okay, would you rather, would you rather your environment be hosted by a large corporation, which to me is the equivalent of like the United States or something, right? The Facebook, or an open source server that you run with your friends that then you can customize to your needs.
Yeah. But here, let me frame this though. I think, like, let's get back to competitive governance. Like, the cool thing about the internet is that the barrier to entry is way lower and the cost of switching is way lower. The cost of switching is not zero, right? If all my friends are on Facebook, it's difficult for me to switch to something else. But like, outside of those effects, it's a lot easier to switch a website or like switch servers than to move. And, what you're saying is, like, you're kind of pitching, like, you're saying, hey, people, like, I think you should get a provider who's like more like open source and community based, not from a giant one. Okay, that's your preference and that's your product. And it's great that you're creating something, but ultimately it's up to people to decide for themselves. And what I just want is for people like you to be able to create things like qbix and Intercoin, right? And if people choose Facebook as their provider, or, they choose Meta, they choose Microsoft, they choose Apple, they choose Google, like, that's okay, right? It's their choice. And it's our job as the people making the new things on the frontier to make things that are like so much, obviously first, that are great for people like us who want that, small custom product, want to be part of a community where we can have influence on it. And then hopefully together we'll make things that are so great that it draws mass numbers of people from the big services, because ours is way better. Or the thing that happens a lot is it forces them to adopt whatever we're doing, like whatever we're doing differently, they have to copy it. Otherwise they'll lose people. And in the charter city space, I think the great example of this is Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Like, unfortunately, China's been going the other way, but during the Deng Xiaoping days, the idea of like, that Shenzhen was partly like copying some of how Hong Kong worked, right? So there's this charter city that was drawing drawing people, it was drawing money. And so China said, hey, let's actually copy some of that, starting in Shenzhen. And that liberalization of their economy, lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So it's great that you're making the small alternative product, but like, people get to choose. It's funny you're showing this stuff about internet addiction. Actually, this afternoon I'm going to go meet the creator of the movie The Social Dilemma, and his next and talk to him about his next project. But it's definitely, look, technology is not all good. It comes with like pros and cons, and internet addiction is real. I got a friend, an entrepreneur friend staying with me right now who started a 12-step group for internet and technology addiction, because there wasn't one. So he struggled with it. Very much like using the models of addiction and using the same 12-step programs that are used for like drug and alcohol. It's serious stuff.
Well, to me, the economics of the internet addiction are important. I think there's also a very good documentary from the past called The Merchants of Cool. This is
hey, I got time to keep going, but I'm going to take a quick, like a 2-minute bio break and grab a Diet Coke. Does that sound good?
Absolutely, man. Sorry that it's just go ahead. Absolutely.
Oh, this is fun. No, I'm fine to keep going. I'll just be right back.
Okay, sounds good. By the way, I want to check in with everybody who's watching. You finding this interesting? Thank you for the upvotes and everything. Chime in, absolutely. What do you think? We're going to bring up people to ask questions for Patri very soon. And in the meantime, just let me know how you're liking this.
It's extremely interesting, and we have some comments already in the group. Please read the chat. People were asking questions there and also commenting there that they really liked it. That it's amazing. In the group chat.
Awesome. Oh, I see. Awesome. And I see. Okay, we got Ariel. Hey, Ariel. I see your video. You're coming through.
Hey, Greg. Hey, guys. How are you guys doing? It's a fascinating discussion. Thanks for organizing that, Greg. Really, really interesting. Patri, I mean, he's been in this role probably maybe sooner than most of us, or maybe earlier than most of us. So it's really fascinating to hear from the guy himself.
Absolutely. I'm fascinated. I mean, as you could see, every one of these topics, you could go on for hours. I'm trying to we've gone through so much, and I hope that we can actually, we're probably going to do a bunch of stuff together, hopefully. Me with the internet, and what he's doing is amazing with Prospera as well.
Yeah, and I find that... Go ahead.
We also have on the call Lena Rancevich. She is the co-founder of Project Your Justice, and I didn't know. I invited her as a guest for the show, but apparently Patri is one of the investors in her project.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you should definitely, we should definitely bring that up. And, anyone who wants to come up, by the way, you're welcome to. I don't mean to monopolize this. I think another 15 minutes, and then I want to open it up for questions for everybody.
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm joining from Mongolia.
Wow. What time is it over there?
It's like 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m.
Wow. So you've been up for the last hour and a half. What do you think of it so far?
Yeah, that's actually good. Actually, I do the electric car, and actually I'm spending. We are preparing our investment in Prospera, Honduras. I know the Mr. Patri through the our mutual friend Michael, the Venezuelan guy. And so right now here, because I make an electric car, and I started my electric car business in December 2019 in Hangzhou, and then actually it turned out that 2 years COVID, and now right now our electric car manufacturing is restarting it. But main thing is Mongolia is very cold, and moving electric car, competing with the Tesla in Mongolia is we are winning over Tesla in Mongolia, because our electric car is much more cold resistant.
Oh, wow.
7 months of the whole year is very cold and quite snowy, and we don't have a proper road and everything. So actually right now what I'm doing is I'm founder of the Moza family, and we make electric car and trying to build a small solar-based houses for families. And then actually we also make a wild blueberry wine, and a food, Moza food, and home and car. And Moza Mind is for education business, a partner with some Jewish partners around the world to the online high school. So because of the COVID, and one of my education companies, the largest online education provider, and right now we are actually over 20,000 students. So thanks to the COVID, also we now the online education is booming in Mongolia, because everyone. So right now I'm preparing to. I just want to let you know that we are making food, and actually the education and car, and maybe next year the home. So in that case, also we have a coin called Moza coin, and raised our some funding for here. So I think that I will move my basic business to the Honduras by the yearly next year. So we'll start my operation over there, I hope.
You're moving to Honduras?
Sending, registering my main business in Honduras. And then actually I will be having some, using this Prospera thing, prosperity very soon. So I'm also a diplomat and a Mongolian consul general to Hong Kong and Macau same time.
So, wow. So I love how everyone is an entrepreneur helping people in the free market, like developing these things. And then at the end, you said you're a diplomat. So what do you think of what we've been speaking about?
Yeah, actually, that's pretty, because one of my very close friends became one of the youngest prime minister in the world. So I have to help him. So he asked me to help him to, for government work. It's like my 23 years and right now. And he is like a graduate at Harvard. And to be honest, I wanted to start my own country. Then I found actually Michael. And because like you have more than 32 government the last 30 years, it's like one government is less than 1 year old. So you really, the government is like it's very hard. So right now, trying to move my main business activity to the Honduras. So basically starting over Honduras and maybe move my family over there, something like that. But still, I have to help my friend who's running this country against the corruption and everything.
So I don't want to monopolize this conversation. I know I've been going on for an hour and a half. I do have two other topics, two other short things I wanted to ask Patri, but I do want to open up to everybody. Maybe we'll take a break. No, actually, if you have a question, or if anybody has a question for Patri, I thought it would be a good time to bring people up and ask.
I'm sorry, Greg, if you mute your second computer because it's echoing. You have a
Is it me?
Yes, it's you only. You need to mute on the other device.
There is no other device. It's my computer flagging. 1 second. I'll mute myself. Anyone who has a question for Patri, feel free.
Hey guys, hi Patri, how are you doing? I actually have one. I'm Ariel from Brazil. I'm a founder of a small, of a startup called Lemon. We are basically a renewable energy marketplace. However, I am really, really fascinated by basically what you've been doing for the past 20 years, I think, and also most of, I think all of kind of your work actually came to my attention after reading Balaji's work, Balaji's new book, The Network State. So I thought it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's probably the thing we should, as a society, be building. We should be building ways and for us to have competing jurisdictions. Let's put it that way. I think it's a fantastic concept for freedom. I do have a couple of questions. My first question is, you also run a venture capital firm, right, Patri? What were you looking for exactly in investments related to network states? I mean, what are maybe your heuristics? What are you looking for? How's your mental model regarding that?
Yeah, great question. So we're mainly focused on the real world communities, what we call sovereign communities. So it's groups of people who are living together and who are taking like some part of the stack of systems that they live under and saying, this is being done in a shitty way, and we want to take it over ourselves. So even I would call Bitcoin a sovereign community, because a group of people who said, we don't like the way that money is being done by central banks and being diluted. Let's create our own non-dilutable currency and use it together. And a charter city is saying, hey, like, we think that we can make better, like, commercial regulations, run a city better, do better, like, municipal design and operations. And so we're looking for projects where there's a group of people who are like redoing or reinventing some part of, the systems of their life. And then like a lot of what we look for is like any like standard venture capitalists, we're looking for founders who are really, really committed to what they do, who have a deep personal passion for building what they're building, who have a lot of grit and resourcefulness, who can like figure things out, kind of like never get stuck. They always have like ideas and ways around. And if founders are working with a government, it's ideal if they have, like really good ties to that country or that region. because it really helps to be like networked to a country that you're working with. Yeah, I mean, it just like from a business perspective, it has to make sense that like this set of people would like want to go live together, and that that you can build a community that appeals to people enough to get them to move, like maybe move like halfway around the world. As we just heard, like Prospera has gotten to that point, but it took a long time. Like the Honduran government like first created this program in like 2010, and I was working with them in 2011, 2012, and here we are 10 years later. So we're really hoping that other sovereign communities can get approved faster. And I'm working with countries that have legislation that's partway passed, but, it can be a long road.
Does anybody else have any questions for Pat? Just feel free to grab the mic. I'm going to mute myself for a little bit because of the echo. Wait, there's no echo anymore, right?
There's no echo anymore.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so like Tyler, Adam, Jeremiah, anybody who wants to ask, feel free. And then I do have two other things I want to discuss. And, sometimes in the end, I do like challenge, I challenged Scott Sands a little bit on the UBI. I do want to ask more sort of provocative questions as well. So go ahead. If anyone wants to jump up, grab the mic.
Hey, Patri. My name is Jeremiah. I just want to ask a question. What do you think would be the best way for us to help the, let's say, middle schoolers to high schoolers understand the kinds of things that you're talking about, or better yet, put them on a path where they have an open mind about building, countries or, expanding their concepts along the lines that you've been talking about?
I mean, I think part of the reason that this space is taking off now is that when I was doing the seasteading work, where I was giving talks from about 2004, I was giving a lot of talks from 2008 when I got funding to start the Seasteading Institute, is that I reached a lot of people who were in, let's say, high school or college and really open to new ideas. And somebody who was 15 in 2008, right, is like 29 today. And so there's a lot of people who went on to have very successful careers who, open-mindedly, got excited about the potential to make new countries. And so I think, there's not a lot of ways to like directly work on new countries when you're in middle school and high school, but you can get the advantage. You have the advantage of being open-minded. You can like learn about the new ideas, learn about the metaverse and AI and charter cities, and then, kind of be like an early adopter or, direct your career to try to work on those companies. I mean, look, a charter city company is still a company. It needs sales. It needs legal. It needs social media marketing. It needs project managers, right? It's not like you need some super specialized career to come help. Just like work hard and make yourself a badass at like any of the things that are useful in business. And then you can pick where you want to contribute. But definitely like part of the boost, and it's the combination of like reaching people when they were young and crypto, and like people, like young people were more open-minded about crypto. And so, the crypto boom like gave money, in some cases gave like hundreds of millions of dollars to like young, open-minded, libertarian people who believe in private alternatives. So like listen to the new ideas and get into them early. That's your advantage. One direct thing is, the like outside of someone like Balaji, who's got like a massive audience, like most of the companies in the space have a pretty small social media audience. And like if 100 people out there, we're working on adding to the Pronomos website, like the social media links for all the companies we've invested in. Prospera is doing like amazing stuff on Instagram, for example. Like if there was just like 100 people who are out there like doing like liking, just like liking and sharing a lot of the stuff, I mean, that would like triple like the engagement for like most social media channels in the community. So that's something that that I think we really need. Just like a large community of people like liking and sharing and engaging, and plenty old enough for that.
So Patrick, can I ask you one more question? If you had one book, what book would you recommend that would help us, continue to develop our ideas around the things you've been talking about? If you could think of one, or let's say 2 or 3 books. I mean, I don't care. I'm just trying to keep it small so that people can at least go after something.
If one book today, I'd say The Network State, for sure. And The Network State is free online. You can get it on Kindle. But you can also just go to the Network State website. It's free online, and it'll introduce you to like just a whole world of different concepts, right? It's like the book is it's not just about making a network state. It's this whole tour through Balaji's like just brilliant and like heretical thinking about a whole bunch of topics. And then if you're interested in, kind of like the competitive governance space, on my, there's a blog that it's not active anymore that I ran for a while called Let 1,000 Nations Bloom. The website is 1000nations.com. And we've got a recommended reading list. It's kind of like in the upper right. It gives you the options for the home or different authors are recommended. It's like some years out of date, but it's a great, just kind of like introduction to, to like things that you could read to get an intro to the space. Tom Bell's book, Your Next Government. I guess it kind of depends what side you're interested in. So Tom Bell's book, Your Next Government, is focused on it from a legal and a perspective. Tom Bell is the person who coined the term polycentric law. And so that's a great one. Titus Gebel's book, Free Private Cities, Making Governments Compete for You. So this is a book that's more from like the city perspective, of like how a privately run city would work, and why it would serve people well. Of course, there's my seasteading book, written with Joe Quirk. It's kind of covers all the different like ocean technologies and possibilities. So those are some of the options.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming aboard Intercoin today to talk about all of these ideas. I'm really fascinated about it.
Awesome.
Absolutely. All right, so let's dive into I wanted to throw out 2 sort of contentious issues. One is that if you're building something from the bottom up, Patrick, you said that people can just choose to leave. And we've seen China try to intimidate them into coming back and so on. But I don't want to talk about force or violence. I do want to point out something, though. A lot of times when people say that A and B decided to do a deal together, so they're both better off, because otherwise they would not have decided, right? I agree with that. However, there's other parties, let's call them C, right? And you could have negative externalities. For example, a husband in a family decides to take a job, and the job pays very well, and so they can afford rent, and they can afford their house or whatever. Now, there's a downside, though, that he now cannot spend time with his family. He may have to work 12-hour days to make partner at the law firm. So he gives up something, and so there's a negative externality, let's call it. On the other hand, the wife also says, I also would like to have a new car, and so I'm going to have a job. And so they both now work long hours, and they neglect each other. Now, here's what I'm trying to say, is that A and B in every case have decided to work together, and individually they are better off. But every A and B can be the C, the negative externality for someone else. And so can't it happen that these negative externalities, right, build up? And so everyone's doing what's in their own best interest, pairwise, but they're also being crapped on by the deal. Like when I hire an overseas developer, I'm not hiring a local developer, right? And so basically in other words, can't it be that through voluntary interactions, you're still getting people stuck in Facebook or stuck in this, or in other words, it's not necessarily clear to me that,
I mean, having like voluntary interactions doesn't mean that people don't make mistakes, doesn't mean that they live the perfect life, right? It's oriented around stopping a particular type of mistake where you like forbid people from interacting for mutual benefit. We want to like try to not do that. But like morality or like libertarianism, like freedom and property rights, like these things, they don't like remove the need for personal virtue. They don't remove the need to like contemplate your life and have the discipline to like do what's working and not do what's not working, right? Like that entire area of character is still absolutely critical, and people are going to make mistakes, and they're going to fall into addictions. Like these things happen. Like personally, during the pandemic, I had a really, really tough time, and I turned to drugs and alcohol, and it was terrible. That kind of like, it has, from my perspective, it doesn't have a lot to do with like the system of like property rights or third parties. Or just, when you have freedom, you have the freedom to make bad decisions, and I was making bad decisions. And so, yeah, I think that's something that's really neglected nowadays. And it's sad because we come back to the circle of control, right? Focusing on what you can control and not on what you can't. I do think that there's like a tendency for like, when you're a libertarian and you have these really different beliefs about right and wrong from the other people in the society around you, that's really hard. And I think it's really easy to go into like resentment and anger about these things that you can't control, like the basic rules for society. And that's just like, it's bad for mental health. And it doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if you're right about right and wrong. You're still like suffering about something that you can't control. But your own personal virtue, your discipline, the shape of your life, that you do have a lot of control. So I think that like if you're like what podcasts are you listening to? Like what books do you read? Like, I think that you should be like listening to, I don't know, like more like, like a Jocko, Willink, or like whatever kind of person like teaches the type of virtue and discipline you need in your life, just because we have more control of that, but like that said, like I've been working for 20 years to try to like fucking change this situation so that we can have some control over what kinds of societies we live in, and we can go start new societies, so I totally appreciate people's support in that. And like, I've helped create these opportunities where you can go and work on those things, or, in the case of Prospera, go like live in those places, which is like awesome. Like you can actually make personal decisions to live in a better jurisdiction. But yeah, I would just say like personal virtue is like more important to your life than like what you think is right or wrong in a society, just because you can control it.
And I love that. I think you and I, I've been at this for 10 years on the internet side, and I'm kind of feeling the same way, that I'm trying to give a choice. And, by the way, I've written articles that say like from digital feudalism to a free market. Like the message that I try to give is similar. It's like from digital feudalism to a free market. In other words, instead of having to belong to Google Suite versus Microsoft Office 360, right? Or Facebook or Twitter, you choose from a free market of hosting companies that host WordPress and host qbix, right? And host all these things. And so I just want to bring the free market to Web 2 and Web 3. But, as we do this, as we build this, I over and over again run into the same thing, which is people in many different ways saying it's not good enough yet. So like, you know, if I have a site like, I don't know, this one with, you know, events, this would be good enough for conferences to use, and they do use it. But like when I talk to a conference, they might say, well, we're already using, you know, this or that. And it's always a question of like how good it is. So here's my point, is that I don't think that people will voluntarily leave New York City, most of them, to live in a commune or a free market, you know, like New Hampshire Free State Project, and then like not have all the, you know, Broadway and the shows and the doctor's appointments that they can do easily and the, you know, all of that. They're giving up a lot that they are used to. Do they need it? Of course they don't need it. 500 years ago, people subsisted on like soup from, you know, rice and right? So of course they don't need it, but people have gotten so used to the stuff that Facebook gives them that they need it with us. And that's my question, is like, I don't think it's enough to give people a choice. I think the choice has to be competitive with like what they're used to. And that takes a lot of investment. Like the cities, you may not like the top-down control. And I personally don't like concentration of power, but guess what? They have a lot of capital to like deploy, right? To create these things. And so how do you compete? How do you make Honduras prosper good enough that people aren't like, you know, missing stuff that they are used to, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge for all of these projects because there's a lot of economies of scale, right? And, you know, living in like larger cities and larger countries, you know, the government often works really poorly. I mean, I'm sitting here in California where the state government is quite dysfunctional. And the city government in San Francisco is pretty dysfunctional. But you do have these huge economies of scale of being like a huge market, and there's tons of jobs and there's access to lots of goods and services. And it's a challenge. I mean, it's one reason why, you know, I think it makes seasteading that much harder, because if you're actually going out into international waters, into the high seas, 200 miles out, you know, you're losing all of that. And so I think that's a big advantage of charter cities. Roatan, for example, where Honduras Prospera is, it has an international airport. It's a major tourist destination. You know, in the past, there were even like direct flights from Europe for people coming in. It's got one of the largest coral reefs in the world. And so building these jurisdictions where they have access to existing infrastructure, I think is just absolutely critical. You know, because they are going to suffer when they're small from just having the diseconomies of scale and things being more expensive and having less goods and services. It's something you have to deal with. But people just have to weigh that against the advantages of being in a really good jurisdiction.
So my last question is like, and the question I ask sometimes many libertarians, which, you know, I'm a libertarian myself, I feel, but my question is, if you build stuff from the bottom up and you have these high-minded ideals, and let's say you start with no state, okay? Eventually you get these economies of scale, people band together, they build their city walls to get the marauders out, right? They do all these things. Aren't you eventually in the end going right back to somebody owning, whether it's privately owned or democratically run, but in the end, you're still having this large organization that's out of touch with the people on the ground again. And like the cycle continues. Like, isn't it, what is the ultimately, doesn't the system grow into what we have today in the end?
No, I don't think so. Because I think what we have today is based on the fact that there's no way for entrepreneurs to found startup societies. Right. I mean, we have the number of governments is increasing, but they all run on kind of old systems of incentives, whether that's democracy or monarchy or military dictatorship or whatever it is. And they're nation states, not network states. They're ethnic groups. So they're ethno-nationalist, which, you know, ethno-nationalism is kind of the oldest and most proven way to have a state. It makes sense. But I think if we create a world where people can group together around whether it's shared values, a type of society that they want to live in, right? Maybe it involves UBI, for example, and that's fine. And then actually go and build that society. I think it like changes the industry. And yeah, if some of them grow, then the advantage they get is economies of scale. And the disadvantage that they get is like being more out of touch with people, like the diseconomies of scale of governance. And if it gets out of whack so that they're doing a bad job, people will just move to places that are doing a better job, right? It's the same as like any other product. Like, look, I can't guarantee you that there's going to be like, you know, a great car manufactured next year, but like, I'm pretty sure that like the state of the art in cars is just going to keep getting better because there's this competitive market and people can switch. And so I'm just saying that we can bring those same market forces to government. Doesn't mean we'll get the perfect jurisdiction. It doesn't mean some of them won't like make mistakes and get big and out of touch. But if we have like a rich, diverse market where people can start things around new ideas and where people can leave the places that aren't working, I think that we'll get like kind of jurisdictions and governance evolving at like a way faster speed. You know, not as fast as other kinds of technology, but a hell of a lot faster than it is now.
Fantastic. No, I think this was I think that we could leave it on that, you know, having a free market of more ideas, more countries. I hope that it can happen. It's just, you know, we've explored so many things. How can the countries allow it? I think they can allow it on the internet, like you said, the network states, right? Or the stuff that we build here. But I think that could be married to like private cities to have a digital twin, right? To have an online version where you visit and you have your metaverse and whatever. I think that's coming. It's not just qbix. It's like, you know, everybody. It's just, you know, I feel like the libertarian in the room when I talk about qbix, because the online communities, for me, Facebook and Twitter, they are the big states, right? They are the ones that have the network effect. They're the ones that have the economies of scale. So it's very easy for them to roll out really cool, addictive technology. And don't get me wrong, it's entirely addictive because like they hire people to make sure, right, that people stay on their site. And yeah. I was just going to say this, it's the tragedy of the commons, right? People don't maybe think of it that way, but the tragedy of the commons or the unmanaged commons is imagine people's attention, right? There's so many minutes in the day, and you could be following Twitter threads, or you could be following like Facebook debates, right? And so if Facebook doesn't like notify you and keep trying to get you in there, then Twitter will, and then Twitter will become the thing. So it's like, unless the Apple like charges for notifications, manages people's like cost of people's attention, it's essentially, it's underpriced, and people are just going to like be abused. And that's exactly why it's not an accident that people are addicted to these things. It's that there's an incentive for everyone to grab as much human attention as possible, the same way they grab as much resources out of the ground as they can, because if they don't do it, then someone else will do it. So the system selects, I think, for the most addictive services. And the only way we can opt out of it is by either, like you said, creating a free market. I'm saying the same things you're saying. I'm just saying them in the internet space, right? Is it create a free market of possible hosts where you can take this host and your, you know, if you're in Greece and you want to pay for a local host for your wedding social network, you could do that instead of having to only choose the monopoly in California, right? So that's like table stakes. That's like the basic thing is you need a free market, like with WordPress. But then after that, these things need to be good enough so it's a viable alternative. You could say, you know what, like, I'm not going to have addictive notifications in my thing because that's not, I don't have a profit motive to like extract rents from everybody and build a monopoly, you know? The last thing I want to ask, this is kind of funny. Peter Thiel wound up investing in the original Seasteading Institute, correct?
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about how you met Peter Thiel? Because I think in that time, he was very much also talking about like innovations, right, in different ways. And I just want to mention something which maybe it's a bad rap. It did for me in the past, but then I actually watched his talks. Peter Thiel Competition is for losers. Build a monopoly. That was his message, and I'll explain why. It was more interesting than it sounds like. Create a monopoly. Be unique. Competition is for losers. So everything we've been talking about, more competition, but Peter Thiel is a very interesting fellow because he talks about Peter Thiel. He gave this talk. He talks about how secretly,
as an investor, right?
Yeah.
As an investor, if you want like the best outcome, you want to invest in something like Facebook that becomes a monopoly, right? Because the more competition there is, the less profit there is for each of the firms, right? The basic economics of like perfect competition versus a monopoly, right? So he's speaking like as an investor. But I do, I think that there are important like differences between like a digital monopoly. Like digital monopolies like turn out to be fragile. If you look at like, I don't know, say Microsoft Windows monopoly, and now we have Apple, we have Android. Like digital monopolies are real, but they're just like more fragile than, you know, a state enforced monopoly.
Well, what about the network effect? So my concern is that Apple gets big, right? They have all the patents, they have all the people. For someone to come along and to create a computer that's a compelling alternative, I mean, what, the framework laptop? Like, it's very hard. It's very hard. And once they do that, they're going to be acqui-hired, and they're going to join, you know, the evil empire, right? The Star Wars, whatever. My point is that some people look at this and they look at open source as being like the movement to take that on, like sort of little by little, meaning like Wikipedia, right? There's no profit motive for anybody. Everyone sort of does a little bit of work, and it's collaborative. Open source, GitHub, like Linux, WordPress. It's sort of these weird, like you're like ants. You're like building these things. Nobody gets any real profit from it, but it's all a gift economy. And you're right. Digital is because the marginal cost of a copy is zero. It's like Albert Wenger, and that's the last thing I just want to say. Albert Wenger wrote a book called World After Capital. Now, this guy's a venture capitalist. Okay, I know him. He works for Union Square Ventures. He became a general partner like a few years ago, and he raised an environmental fund. He wrote a book called The World After Capital, and it's of course freely available, right? But the point is that he talks about how the cost of making a copy on the internet or the computers is almost zero. So when you have a good solution, right, like a self-driving algorithm by Tesla, it just gets downloaded to everybody. So why not make it a publicly available good and finance it with, I don't know, like UBI or Apache Software Foundation or whatever? I guess the question is,
look, this is the idea, right? The entire point of my work is to make it possible for people with ideas about how to run a society differently to actually put them into practice instead of fucking sitting around and arguing about it and being like, all right, let's have a beer and debate like how we ought to run a society. I think this will work. No, I think you're stupid. I think that'll work. No, you know, instead of all of that shit, make a world where like you got an idea. Well, you got to convince enough people that you know that's what they want to live under, like, to form a community and demonstrate that people want to live there. You can like get funding. You can like build out the concept, and then, you know, depending on how ambitious you are, how radical it is, you may then just go slot into one of the existing charter cities, right, with your idea that's going to let you like. Because in like a voluntary contractual society, right, the job of the charter city is to make this container where like it's the interface to the country, and the container like it's like got a basic legal system, but of course you can like contract in to customize that. Like UBI is a great example. If you want to have like taxes that are managed by a community DAO that are used to like improve like the physical neighborhood, anything like that, you can just contract into. Right. So you don't even have to negotiate with the government. You can just like slot into one of our communities. Or if what you want to do is like really, really different, you want to be that platform at that top level, well, then you would work with someone like me to find different countries to talk to and work with them and develop a relationship over time, and then go build your thing. But like that's the world that I'm creating, where we can take these ideas like out of the discussion boards and put them into practice.
Fantastic. Well, Patri, I got to say this was an amazing discussion. I hope to have one again with you in the future, and hopefully everyone who's listening, we're going to cut this into clips. We have our community watching, earning credits for cutting things into clips and sharing, etc. So if anybody wants to know more or you have questions for Patri, you could always go to the Intercoin forum, community.intercoin.org. We're releasing the Intercoin app in a few weeks. That's going to be intercoin.app, and everyone's going to be part of the community. So anyone that has a question, like pop on here. Patri, like you're probably going to get emails of people if they have questions. So feel free to, participate in the discussion.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Anyway,
all right, thanks for having me. This was super fun. Look forward to seeing the clips.
Absolutely. And thanks again to everybody. And yeah, man, we'll talk later.